I always forget my
So VC1 and VC3, what I'm trying to understand, so that's where you go over the railroad track.
I got it by email. By email. I was like, oh, I just have to remember.
Yeah.
Did anyone not get a paper packet?
I got mine, thank you.
No, we all got it.
Okay.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't think I, for some reason, but it was
Yeah,
whatever.
That's,
You guys all have the material?
that's the freeway.
That's the
Thank you.
freeway, and then this is Route 1.
This is Route 1, so what's? Urban?
Are you aware that Robert can't be here today?
There's not much room.
No,
Very
I am now.
busy.
What about Wayne?
And this, I'm wondering,
Oh,
is
wait,
that where?
it's probably
the new
coming, didn't
housing
hear?
is?
Okay,
Desert Road?
No, the desert road's here.
we'll give Robert a bye because he ran the meeting last week. Right? So,
Town, this is town center.
No, that's different here.
No, county law, county
Oh,
road,
County
county road.
Okay.
all right,
I think we need bigger.
6:05. Tom, I think we are good to go.
That shows where Eames is, and then
Oh, I see
that's.
that.
Do we have to wait for anything, Cecilia, on the, will he, like, wait for the recording sign or something?
I think it's already recording.
Okay. All right. We'll hope for the best. All right. It is 6:05. My pleasure to call to order the October 5th meeting of the Freeport Planning Board. We are down a couple members. We're hoping Wayne will show up. If he does, we will welcome him here. Robert is out tonight. Thanks to everyone for doing the emergency meeting last night. Last week, last Wednesday. Shirked my duty on that one, but I would have had to recuse anyway, so. Item number 1, information exchange. Update on the Downtown Vision Plan Implementation Task Force. Cecilia, do you have anything on that?
Sure. So the Town Council will be holding a workshop on October 11th at 6 o'clock at the Community Center. At the workshop, people will be able to see that short list of goals that of projects that are going to be recommended to the Town Council that the task force has been working on. And you'll be able to interact with members of the vision team and the town councilors, and people are hopefully are welcome to come and hopefully will show up. It's a great opportunity for people to share their thoughts and ideas about what's important for them, and that goes to the planning board members as well. And it especially would be great for you to go to this meeting, because as people and residents are discussing their visions and their goals and their ideas for the future of Freeport, and you're involved in amending and changing the zoning ordinance to make those visions possible. So it'd be great if you guys can join.
At the community center
At the
on
Free-
Depot Street.
Yep. Tuesday the 11th. I will be there at one of the tables. There's kind of like a little round table time to be there and explain a little bit of what's going on, or what's been going on, and what hopefully will be going on over the next months and years. So yeah, it'd be good to see if you folks have some time to be there on Tuesday. Update on item number 2. Any other questions on that? Item number 2 is an update on review of items reviewed by the PRB, Project Review Board. Cecilia, that's you or Caroline, I guess.
Sure. So a couple of updates from the last Project Review Board meeting on September 21st. The Freeport Station apartment, that was 67 units on Depot and Mill Street, received final approval. So that will be going in, perhaps.
67 units.
67 units.
And that's the one back here.
Yes, it's on that not empty, it's on a parking lot
Yeah.
on that corner of Depot and Mill Street.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
that got its final approval. The concept plan for the Freeport Village Apartments, which is right there on that lot next to Town Hall, the concept plan was found to be complete, so they're that can move on to the next phase of the project review board review for subdivision. Also, under the new Shoreline Zoning, which you all approved last year or earlier this year, I can't remember the exact date of the official approval, but the project review board issued two shoreline zoning permits for two shoreline stabilization projects in two different places, both on Cunningham Road. And then finally, the Desert of Maine also had a site plan amendment for alterations to their previously approved site plan for the cabins, and they're adding a little pad for a seasonal tent to supplement their programming. And that's it for my updates.
Great. All right, item number 2 is continued discussion on appropriate zoning districts for performance standards for the possible uses of cannabis manufacturing and processing and cannabis cultivation. Those are two new definitions. Draft zoning and performance standards will be introduced, and there's a variety of districts that we've talked about a whole bunch of times into which these new uses will potentially be allowed. This is part of an ongoing discussion. There's no public hearing tonight. We are reviewing language that Cecilia has been working hard to compile for us, and my understanding is that the town attorney and her team still have the language and will be making final changes, obviously pending whatever we come up with tonight, if there are any changes or thoughts or things that need to be incorporated. The town attorneys will have kind of the last crack at this before we go to public hearing. So is that fair, Cecilia?
Yes. So the town attorneys already did a quick review and incorporated their suggestions. I incorporated their suggestions into the draft you have right now.
Mm-hmm.
There will be some other issues that we need to work out with the legal team, especially surrounding the caregivers, because that's a whole other ball field. So they'll be helping us with that. And so at the last, this is our,
Could you repeat that about the caregivers?
yeah, so
That
the.
is a ball of wax.
Right, so we focused mostly on the adult use, and there are some state preemption about how we can regulate caregivers. So it gets a little tricky, and that's one of the things that Amy and Grady, the town attorney team, flagged for us to work on.
But since they're the experts, we're going to kind of let them
Yeah.
do the heavy lifting on that, just because it's sort of governed by state statute that
There's less ability of us to regulate them, so we have to be careful about how we proceed. And also, we don't really know how the town council wants to address them. You know, these are the ones that they can have that canopy of 500 square feet or 30 plants, so they're not very big. It's that minimum, tier 1 size.
But is there even they're all licensed so that they could
They have to be-
could be found?
Right,
I
they
mean,
have
it's
to be licensed.
theoretically possible to regulate it. Theoretically. Yeah.
oh, they are regulated. Yeah.
I mean,
the town.
but in terms of putting our own ring around them, you
I-
could find them. I didn't even know if you could find them. That's what I was
Yeah.
asking.
Yeah.
I don't really know much about the medical caregiver, so I don't want to give you wrong information. My understanding is that, they can run these businesses from their own residences, but if we want to regulate in other zones, then it gets a little, that's something that we need to work out with the legal team.
So it sounds like before we spend time discussing that, we probably are better off getting their advice and their input.
I don't think it's going to be anything major, and I don't know if that's going to be a policy decision I don't know if the planning board is going to be the ones making a decision on that. So, but it shouldn't, it will be incorporated into this, so
Okay. All
we
right.
can move on without,
Okay. No,
Yeah.
So they can have medical at home and not fall under any of these regulations? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they sell it, they dispense it. It's in the definition here.
Yeah.
They
Once
sell
you-
and dispense.
But they can do
But
They
that,
it's-
don't
Yeah.
process it.
But you have to be a registered.
you have to register it, even if you're doing it at home.
Yeah. You have to be.
No, You can
registered.
grow your own at home. That's legal in the state.
Yeah, well, I knew that.
You can grow,
Just has to do with selling to other people.
Yeah, that's,
Right.
or people who grow for other people, for, people who are certified.
Right, but we
need that.
can't, I mean, I think basically, we cannot limit that beyond what the state allows, right?
Right,
Like,
we
the
don't-
state
we-
has protections for caregivers, and so we can, so that's the part that we can't, it doesn't make sense for us to overstep our bounds, only to have the attorneys say, no, you can't do that anyway, so.
No, I understand.
I just don't know where the line is, that's all. I don't understand where the square footage line is. If at home there's a square footage line, or if they're in another building it's not, or what happens in their own home. That's all.
So the planning board is really looking to, the town council directive was we want to incorporate cultivation facilities and manufacturing facilities, which would not be part of this caregiving facility purview.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
So basically, we're not even discussing.
Yeah, I
it
think
right now.
I think that
We're
we
not
better let that,
discussing it
leave
right
that one
now.
alone. So, to kind of put my cards on the table on this one, I feel like we've spent a ton of time on cannabis, and I really want to move on. I think we are at a great place here. I read through the draft. I think it's really close, and I think that there's probably, obviously, I want to hear from everybody here and, hear everybody's concerns. But for me personally, I feel like we could do some more wheel spinning, but I think we're going to be better off just taking this to public hearing as quickly as we can. So that's my 2 cents.
I do have some additional policy questions for you, so don't get
Great.
carried away with that.
Yep. No, I want to hear from everybody, but
I
that's,
want to support that.
Yeah.
I feel like we have thought about it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We instructed you to think about it in a very specific way, and you did that.
Yep.
And now you've written it up in a way that's completely consistent with what seems to make the most sense for this issue. So it is time for a public, now, there may be other issues we have to work through, but I agree.
yeah, I just,
Let's see what other people say. I mean, I had a couple questions, but you
yeah,
can do your
absolutely.
stuff.
No, that's why we're here, is to do everybody's questions and hear from Cecilia. But I definitely want to try to keep this moving, because I feel like we have spent a lot of time on it, and I think we've come to a pretty good place, a good jumping off point. So, questions, or,
The first point of clarification is that at the last meeting, I think we omitted talking about commercial 3 zone.
VC1 and VC3.
Right, I think,
That's
I
my
couldn't really.
question.
Yeah, so that's why, we said to add VC3, but then I noticed that C3 is also one of those that allows manufacturing. And I have, if you need to look at that table of uses, so my understanding was that we were going to allow it where manufacturing is allowed, and it doesn't necessarily have to be manufacturing plus warehousing.
That's what we decided, however, I'm wondering if there's a special case on VC1 and VC3.
VC1 is a special case because manufacturing is allowed differently there than in other zones. So VC1 is, the manufacturing has to be related to a retail store. So because we were not going to allow retail, then you wouldn't be able
So
to
is
have.
VC1 and VC3 excluded? That's the question. Are they excluded or included?
VC1 isn't even in it.
Yeah.
Oh,
She's just saying
VC1, it's
they'd be
VC,
adding to the strips.
it's VC3 and and C3 that's
I'm sorry,
being added.
C3.
Yes,
That's-
sorry.
So,
And VC3.
I think, isn't C3, and I don't have the, I guess I do, I could open my
Make sure
map.
we know where those places are.
But I think C3 is the one that's mostly inside a buffer zone, isn't it?
I can open that up for
Did you
you.
have more to say though, Cecilia? I feel like you were starting to go
Yeah,
down
you
the
had
path
other
of-
questions,
Yeah.
that's right.
So here's that buffer.
I think
Is
this
everyone
was the
able to
first
see
one.
this?
But
And I can keep scrolling. I thought you would ask this. So,
Okay, so there's C3.
sorry, that's not loading very great. But, so you can see that technically there are some parcels where it would work. And I personally would rather take the approach of not necessarily using the buffer, especially for something like a childcare center, which could eventually close. So I'm thinking more of like the long range, this is a policy for the long range and not like a short-term thing.
Are we?
Where are we?
Where are we? Please help
Sure.
us be
Let's
very
go back
clear
here.
where we are.
So that's, C3 is here on the middle where the circle is.
And
That's right around Independence Drive, isn't it?
Independence Drive, okay.
That Independence Drive right down here?
Yeah, I think it's like, pet pantry and
Yeah.
that area. So it's like, you can see that little I zone is the bean, the bean
Bean
corporate.
sprout.
Casco Street?
No, the Bean corporate headquarters, LO Bean corporate headquarters.
So what's
That's
it,
Casco Street.
how do you even get to the
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
part of that little wedge that sticks down? Where does that come off of?
I think it
don't know.
extends to like Varney Road.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's no like street
Oh,
names
there it
here,
is, there
but
it is. Oh, the back of Varn, right.
I mean, I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, so that's Pine Street. That's where it goes down Pine Street.
Oh.
So that's those two lots that Beans owns. Then there's the condos on Pine Street. That other block, the big block right there that touches the RP1, Beans owns, that's 40 acres that the town traded to
And then
them.
the big one there is that where the buffer goes through is Maine Beer. Is that right?
No.
That'd be too far
and I
down.
think
No,
Bean
Beans
Beer
owns
is
that.
further down,
Beans owns that.
further south, I mean.
That's right across from
Oh, right,
Reagan's.
okay.
That's right across from Shaw's,
Yeah.
that field. And then you run into Stars and Stripes, those two or three little lots in the corner. One's R&D Automotive, the
Yeah.
other one's Antonia's, and the other one is Stars and Stripes. Those three little lots there.
Which little, oh, I see.
Yeah,
Down.
Was R&D.
it was R&D, now it's
Wish they were
Doton's.
still there.
Now it's Doton's.
Okay. So I think C3, I think it makes sense personally to have that be in there. I agree with Cecilia's take on the fact that the buffer exists now and excludes most of the zone, but it may not forever, and things
Right.
change, and we may, there's no, according to the other criteria with which we have developed these standards, C3 would be a good candidate
That
for this.
buffer is the
So,
childcare at the Hampton Inn?
Bean
Yes.
sprouts.
The Hampton Inn?
Yes,
Yeah.
bean sprouts.
Yeah. Okay.
And what about VC3?
I sort of feel the same way about VC3.
So
Could
can
we
we
see
look
on
at,
that?
yeah, can we just make sure we know exactly where that is?
So VC3 is down here. Let me, so I could probably, sorry, this is not my computer, so that's where VC3 is.
This is working. This is working though.
It's that area,
That's Independence Drive area.
yeah,
Got it.
it's pretty small.
Hairdresser, insurance company,
Wilbur?
Yeah,
Wilbur's.
Wilbur's Chocolate.
Yeah,
Well, the old Wilbur store. I guess the new Wilbur store too, probably.
yeah.
What was it?
Or it was Wilbur store I-1.
I think the
I believe
I-1
that
is
these
the
two,
Bean campus.
Is what?
Isn't that the Bean campus?
Wilbur's on both sides of the road there. See, I think.
Oh, yeah, sorry, the
I
other
think that's
side.
up there
yeah,
where the
yeah.
warehouse is for, it's the old Hunter Road, whatever they call it
Mhm.
now. Got cut off of the highway.
Yep.
So, Eastland Shoe was up there, and I think they
Yeah.
still are. That's their warehouse.
you can keep in mind too that there are other standards that govern these two zones, these two additional zones. And for all of them, like site plan review, they would have to meet state licensing requirements in addition to our local license, which we have not crafted yet. And I believe that will be more, that won't be the purview of the planning board as well. But see Village Commercial District 3 and and Commercial District 3. There also, if the part of the parcel, for a chunk of it, will be on the design review too, so they would also have to meet those requirements. And Commercial 3, just like Commercial 1 and Commercial 4, would also have to meet those. They're also subject to Section 5 27, those performance standards for commercial districts, which are additional standards, which I know I shared with you at the last packet, but I didn't include them on these because we wouldn't be altering anything there.
Yeah, overhead doors and screening and all kinds of good stuff.
Buffering and-
Buffering, yep.
So of course, I don't know if you want to continue to discuss it, but I do have then some questions to the board, which is on this current draft that I'm presenting, because I didn't know which way you felt about it. I drafted in a way so that outdoor storage is prohibited, but I don't know if it matters or not. If we're going by the same standards for manufacturing and processing, then, I can, for instance, on MDA and MDB, there is like a limit on the size. I think it might be 5,000 square feet of outdoor storage that they can have.
And it's subject to site plan review, right?
Yes.
The types of materials have to be approved by the project review board. I think I read that one, which seems hard to enforce, but anyway. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I
Trying to
agree.
figure out what are the preferred outdoor storage materials opposed to what.
Well, I mean, yeah, what are you storing a pile of I-beams, or are you storing
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a,
yeah. Well,
you
if
know,
it's debris, that's
yeah,
different
right,
than a
and-
building.
Yeah.
Of course, for the way it's written for, in terms of like cannabis plants, I mean, that, with the standards, they do have to dispose of them. They couldn't just pile it all up outside, so.
Right, but if it's like stacks of pallets or something like that, I don't know, I mean,
So that's
Maybe
up to
further into
you
the
for,
Should be the same restrictions as manufacturing, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Unless there's something noxious that we don't know about.
there's also a prohibition on
Noxious
noxious,
stuff. Yeah.
hazardous substances, so,
right. That's right.
yeah, I feel like we're pretty well covered
Covered.
on a lot of this stuff.
But currently it's written so it prohibits.
Outdoor
so I
storage.
can change that. So follow manufacturing standards.
Can you just be clear about what those standards are before we do something we didn't mean
The manufacturing standards.
for outdoor storage?
I don't have the zoning ordinance in front of me, and I would also have to consult it myself, but I know that.
Is
I-
there anything we'd be sorry about?
So on medium density one, I mean, A and B, there is a restriction of,
No outdoor storage of any item other than
Yeah,
types of
so-
items approved by the project review board.
Yep,
in manufacturing and processing, they can have, that's the one that has a size limitation on the size of the facility, that's
right.
on those two
So
districts.
so MDA and MDB have a 10,000 square foot gross floor area max for the building, and then up to 5,000 square feet of outdoor storage area. And that's where it says the types of items, or the type of items to be stored outdoors must be approved by the project review board.
Perfect.
So, yeah. That seems reasonable. I mean,
And does that follow through in all the districts, more or less?
let's see.
No.
I don't think,
No,
so
it
the size restriction does not. So if you were,
Right, but in other words, it would make sense to just follow it.
well, I think that's part of the, wasn't that part of the objection we heard from folks last time, was restricting the size of buildings, people in the industry?
Well, you hit the different tiers if you have different square footage.
Right, but again, it would just follow manufacturing, right?
Right,
You have the
which is,
same-
that's
In some of these zones, you might not get a big enough building to get to the next tier.
right.
That'd be their problem then, right?
I don't think there are other size,
Yeah.
besides MDA and
That's right.
MDB, I don't think there's any other size restriction on manufacturing and
Right.
manufacturing facilities under the manufacturing and processing uses standards. There are,
So you could have a giant one in all the other zones and get up to the
And
next
in these
tiers.
zones, is that manufacturing restriction what these guys were saying couldn't
right,
make
if
it?
we had incorporated those warehouses standards.
The warehouse standards are tighter than the manufacturing.
Right.
Yep.
And then it would have made these two existing facilities that are, one I think is on MDA and the other one's in MDB, it would
Yeah.
make them
But
non-conforming.
under the manufacturing, they're okay
Right,
as they
because
sit.
because they were even approved at the time they came, my understanding is that they were approved as a manufacturing facility, so they were already meeting those standards.
Yep. Yeah, so I think I'm okay with outdoor storage with the restrictions that are in here, that it has to be approved by the PRB in MDA and MDB. And then I think, I guess I'm sort of in favor at this point of including it in the VC3 and the C3. But certainly happy to hear other concerns or questions.
There'll be a public hearing on that.
Yes, there will. But do we want to include it in the draft that gets noticed for the public hearing?
If it's, is it?
If you're
I guess I
considering
should-
it.
Well, yeah, but that's what I guess what I'm asking is it just me or does everybody feel that way?
Well, the question I wanted to ask about it is, I think you included them because it was consistent with what we set out to do. And that though manufacturing is permitted in those two zones and therefore it should be. It's not like the VC3 that has special manufacturing.
C1 has special, I mean, VC1
VC1,
has manufacturing that would never be able
Right,
to be
yeah.
possible for cannabis, because it needs to be
But
associated
these
with
two,
it.
you just flagged them because you felt that they were the same as the others we had okayed.
The two
The-
VC3,
And C1 and VC3.
C3
I
and
mean,
VC3.
C1,
C3 and VC3.
C3 and VC3,
the
that's
threes.
correct.
That's okay, I know, it's like,
Yes,
it's
I-
hard to
there's
go back
two.
and forth.
Yep, it's hard.
So VC3, like at the last meeting, I heard from the board that we wanted to add them because they allow manufacturing and processing, and that we were just going to follow manufacturing and processing, but it's my own fault for being kind of not paying attention to the table, but C3 also allows manufacturing, and that's why I added it in, to keep it
Understand.
consistent, so that the policy is, or
Consistent.
the rationale is that we're going to follow, we think that a cannabis manufacturing or a cultivation facility in its use, in terms of land use, is similar to how a manufacturing facility would run. So we're going to, so where we allow manufacturing, we're going to allow these two
This is
cannabis
totally
uses. And we're going to use the same standards because
Yes.
we're considering that, from a land use perspective, that it has the same impact as a manufacturing facility.
Right. Which I think was kind of, I mean, I remember Wayne making that point. Must have been
I
a
think-
lot of meetings ago, like,
That's right.
what do we?
That's simple.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, I think it's a good
Yes.
direction. Other questions you had, Cecilia, for?
Yes, so do you wish for any other separation requirement? For instance, we could have a stricter separation from, like we have the buffer from the schools of 1,000 feet. You could also have a buffer from, from facility to facility, or you could have a buffer that's different for, residential if you want. It's up to you, it's your policy decision. We can stick with, it's the same impact of a manufacturing facility, so we're just gonna go with that. Or you can decide that you want to give it a little extra protection and add separation requirements from each other facility, or so that there isn't like a concentration of them in one area.
Would we worry if there was a concentration of any other kind of manufacturing, and would that make a difference?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, that's one thing I've noticed, and maybe this is just with retail, but I mean, just as a person like driving around different towns of Maine, there in some small towns and even in Portland, like
Swarms of
so
them. So many.
many.
It's outrageous.
so many.
Yes.
And I don't know if that would happen with manufacturing and processing plants, but
Yeah. I mean, they're so low key, almost by necessity, right? Like,
yeah. So not similar to, I guess I'm just raising that concern of,
Yeah.
is that something that we want to be thinking about?
Also, I mean, this is something that you could maybe make the recommendation for don't know if it's going to be the ordinance committee or the town council that will be reviewing the licensing, but that is something that could be addressed
I
on
like that
the
idea.
licensing.
Because that's almost an easier way to regulate it, is at the, because they'll have a handle on who
Who's
holds a
there.
license
Yeah.
and where the location is of the next license. I mean, I,
However, the town attorney suggested to not put a cap, which a lot of towns do use, so,
okay.
you know.
But even if you
Why is
don't put
that?
a cap, you could still say, you know, oh, this is gonna be right next to another one, so, like having a buffer zone. And not,
I think that if you want a buffer zone from facility to facility, it might be better to address it here on the land use, because that is a land use. It's not like hours of operation or, you know, something like that.
You had a question?
No, I have a comment.
Yeah.
Just that I think that our logic falls apart the more we make it different from manufacturing and processing. To me, I'm not sure I understand why it would matter if these facilities ganged up. I'm not sure I would like that, but I wouldn't like it if, they were all car repair shops, but if car repair shops were allowed, they could do that.
but we're not really, I mean, like, if we really were following this to a T, like, we would say it's artisan food and beverage, but, as we talked about.
No.
You could
bec-
easily
yeah.
make that
Okay, yes, you could. So
easily
we're not
make
going that
argument.
far. We're just saying that it's the same kind of land impact. That, the point is manufacturing has a certain kind of impact on its neighbors. This has a similar impact on its neighbors. I'm not sure why two in a row would have a different impact on its neighbors.
But
I'm
isn't it kind of
open.
like the solar farms? We want those distance. Why do we want those distance instead of a whole field of
'Cause I think-
solar? I mean, visually, that's what bothers me, is I'm like, are we gonna have just warehouse after warehouse? That's annoying.
But I think in the case, at least for me, thinking about solar, that's different because you've got, if you have, like, if all of Route 1 South became solar arrays,
Yeah.
you would just, that's what you would see, and it's so different from anything else. Whereas if the entire MDB district became warehouses, I mean, you could have a car, an auto service place, you could have I don't know, a shoe factory, you could have a boot factory, and they might all look pretty similar, right? So I think that's, to me, where putting a buffer in for solar makes a lot of sense, so that you break it up, so that you don't end up with like a mile
There's a
of just
visual
solar
impact.
panels. There's a different visual, and there's a uniformity to solar panels that's really striking. Like,
Yes.
they all look the same.
Well,
So-
so I'm just trying to go to the worst case, because, if these, that's why I keep saying, is there something noxious we're not thinking about? If it's all behind closed doors, and it's basically just a warehouse and what they're doing inside the warehouse, then it seems hard to want to mess with what they're doing inside their warehouse.
Yeah, I mean, I
If
think,
it has an impact on the neighborhood, then we should be considering it.
Well, there is an outside smell.
And,
Yeah.
and there is an impact on the neighborhood. I mean, let's say like about, if you had, I guess there's not that many residential dwellings in the districts that we're
In MDA and
considering,
MDB
but,
there
like,
is.
I wouldn't necessarily, if you're having young families looking around, like being near, that wouldn't incentivize perhaps
Yeah.
living there.
yeah, I think we had somebody from the public, I don't remember his name, who lives in the MD, one of them
Right.
Yep.
up there,
Right.
and he said he was, 200, he said 200 feet, maybe 150.
He was close and he smelled it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And, I think that that is, for me, that's the point. And I could see, like, I mean, if you have a buffer, I'm not sure it really, like, is it better if you have two of them over here and your house is 300 feet away? Or is
Yeah,
it better if there's a 600-foot buffer and then you've got one on either side and you're right in the middle? It may be possible to overthink.
That's a
It's
good point.
definitely possible to overthink
Yeah,
this.
that's a
I
good.
hadn't thought about that.
we may
Just make-
be-
Probably better to just have them closer together in one lump.
Yeah, and then,
Yeah.
no matter which way the wind's blowing,
Blowing.
it's a tough one.
Well, going back to the cap, was
Yeah.
there a reason why they didn't want? the
Yeah,
cap?
I think Amy's opinion was that, because you have to set up a process for selecting who is going to get, that license, and usually Not so much for probably cultivation and manufacturing, but for retail. You know, if that opened up, then there's a slew of people who want to grab one of those licenses, and then you have to create this whole, you know, do you do a lottery? And then there could be like lawsuits involving, was it fair or not fair?
But retail's off the table.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're only talking about this, and there is a fear somewhere, I think among all of us, about there being too much of it. And that seems like it would easily be addressed by cap, but that would still require them to go through all those machinations of.
And a lot of towns do have caps. I've noticed that. I mean, it is a tool that towns can use.
Too much, couldn't
If it
they?
became too much, it's possible that the town could just amend its licensing ordinance to put a cap if they
Right.
felt like it was getting out of control. But sometimes prevention is better than waiting, although I didn't consider that you could be stuck between
Just
two
doesn't
of them.
seem like a use issue.
Part of my feeling about wanting to, and this I could be totally wrong. I know it's dangerous to make predictions. I feel like that when this became decriminalized and possible at the state level to do, there was a huge explosion. I think we've seen most of the growth already.
Correct.
Maybe not all of it, but most of it. I think there was a huge acceleration in, you know, all of the, to meet a demand that was there and being met maybe in other ways, but there was, you know, the demand grew because now people who were worried about the illegality of it were no longer had that concern. So there was an increased demand, supply increased. I'm not sure how much more supply is going to increase. I think
I've had
And
that
there's too
same-
much supply now,
Yeah.
from what I hear.
yeah, so I think that, you know, a lot of this, I think it's great to be thinking about it, but I suspect we're not going to have an issue with too many. If we have, I mean, I'm sure there'll be issues, you know, there are always issues with these
I
things,
believe-
but we may not be able to solve them with buffers and all that other stuff, so.
And I think the best point you made is any buffer we put in place, it's gonna create other
Yeah,
issues.
I think the one buffer that I would potentially support is to a residential dwelling, and I think it's mostly coming from the comment that we heard from the gentleman who was here, who said, you know, yeah, I think I wouldn't want to be any closer. I get the sense maybe he would actually like to be a little less close, but he certainly wouldn't want to be any closer than he was to a facility. So I think if there's, you know, and I don't know how, I'm sure it probably would put one of our existing businesses into legal nonconformance, but.
Depending on if it was 1,000 feet, for sure. I think Caroline has her hand up.
Oh, good.
She might
Hi,
have some good
Carolyn.
insights.
Hi, no, so I just wanted to clarify what you guys have kind of hinted on. So the council asked you guys to look at the land use aspects. So I think if there's a land use aspect of this potential use that for some reason you want to limit, you know, per distance or separation, you can do that. As far as licensing and caps, those are policy decisions. And those are decisions up to the town council. You know, we learned from Amy that there's different tiers. You know, the council, although you guys aren't putting a square footage limitation on buildings in most districts, if the council choose to only allow certain tiers in Freeport, that essentially is going to be a policy decision and really further limit the square footage of buildings. And the second feedback I had gotten from a cannabis grower is that in these discussions, it's really easy. And I think we all just naturally have the tendency to go towards imagining these structures as looking like manufacturing and processing or warehouse facilities. But that's not always the case. In a lot of places, they take different shapes and forms. And I think, like Sam said, you know, we have a lot of other uses in our commercial districts that are in metal buildings, but we also have standards that would apply to all the uses to help make sure they all appear, you know, in a certain way. So you do have those added protections. But I think we need to kind of stay away from the whole licensing and caps and some of those limits, because those really aren't under the purview of the planning
Well,
board.
we totally understood that. We just were trying to figure out if it was a problem, would it become somebody else's problem? Do they, or, you know, must it be fixed here?
It could be, but if you guys feel like there's a true land use problem from it, then that is your jurisdiction and you should definitely address it.
think we're just having some good general discussion, but that helps to clarify. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thoughts on a buffer on,
Housing,
from,
I'm thinking about that.
yeah.
So, just for not that this should guide us, but what's the closest right now?
Hold on, I think I have some notes.
Because that does seem like the one thing that,
Is that from residential you're discussing?
yes.
Yeah, and then what would it be measured to a,
Right, would it be measured from the
Lot line?
property line or from?
House, yeah, right.
probably existing structure?
Yes.
Existing residential structure.
Right, I think it's, I think one of them might be, from the structure of the facility to the house, and I didn't go out there with a measuring tape, just with like Google Earth. I think it's about 150.
Yeah, he's really close,
And
that guy, yeah.
146 is the other one. So the setbacks,
I think if we went much bigger, though, we would occlude huge sections of specifically those two zones that we just talked about, VC3 and C3. I think a big chunk of that would go away, unless we said like only single family in rural districts or something. I mean,
So you'd have to make
Right.
it 100 feet. That's all you'd get.
yeah, that's
I
like
don't know if
across
that
this
does any
room, though,
good.
you know?
Yeah. It's twice the room, but
Yeah, no, yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be worth putting, say, 100 feet or 150 feet in there as a,
That's
Point
not
of-
gonna knock the smell down any.
that's probably true, too.
You know, how much you need, you'd
Probably
need,
true. Yeah.
500 feet at least, right?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, so you
I
think
mean, this
it's,
is also where we can get good public feedback.
so, on,
And
Right,
didn't
if
we
we-
hear that, just one more question about the smell, because that is I keep trying to figure out what's noxious to somebody else.
Right.
And that is, but I thought we heard that they have smell standards and that
They
if
do,
you
yes.
smell it, that they're in trouble.
there is there's that section in here.
so I put a
Get somebody to
section,
enforce it.
Right, it's hard, yeah.
they do, I think, have odometers types of things. I think Amy and Grady were talking about that at that workshop. I know that the odor is something that is a problem for a lot of communities. So I know it was a big problem in reading through the planning materials of South Portland. So the one that I chose as our model, and this draft is a combination of several towns because I didn't find one that fit us, was the South Portland's, adapted South Portland's odor management, which Amy and Grady thought was
So where's that?
reasonable.
Let's go find it.
It's,
It's toward the back, I think, isn't it?
and it looks like on MDA and MDB too, in terms of setbacks from residential, I think there is supposed to be
30?
100 feet.
31? 31, yep. Number 5.
I missed what you said last. This is,
Yes, so, some, each district has its own setbacks, but, one that I'm noticing right now is that MDA, MDB, where the current facilities are, it does have this additional setback standards for, on page 6, sorry, of your packet.
help us find it again? Where are you going? Page 6?
Yeah, so this is for MDA, MDB, and it's sort of like right under the
Oh, right.
setbacks,
Yeah.
it does say from residential buildings, and I added cannabis cultivation and manufacturing facilities,
So we've
as
got our
that would be
100
the
foot.
same as manufacturing,
And it's 100 feet.
right?
We already have that.
Just in those two zones.
Yep.
The other
Those are
ones we'd have
basically
to
where
look.
it matters, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I feel like I'm invoking Wayne, even though he's not here. I feel like he said something about this, again, where it's like, this is not the only odor that you could imagine from a manufacturing and processing. I mean, anybody who's ever driven through a paper town, you know?
Right.
So, you know,
That's right.
I mean, there are lots of other options here for odors that would be objectionable. I mean, I think this one has sort of the overtone, certain emotional reactions that may not be there with other odors,
It's
but
no worse than something else that would be allowed.
yeah, it's I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't even know. Yeah, I guess I'm just still pushing for. I think we're really close.
Right.
So let's take it to public
Okay.
hearing.
But then, yeah, I mean,
Anything else?
Yeah. You have other questions for us, Cecilia?
no, I mean, we could walk through this if you want and see if there's anything that stands out, or we can just go to public hearing and see what people think and adjust accordingly.
I'm pretty comfortable with, I think, I read through all the signage and odor management and all that stuff. And, oh, sorry, I said 5, I meant 4 before for the odor management part of it, as opposed to the noxious
Oh, yeah, we can go back there.
gases and substances. But anyway, I think the sort of, I guess you could call these performance standards, right, that are specific to cannabis cultivation and,
Yeah, this would be a new section
yeah.
that would be specific.
So it's super clear here.
Yes.
Yeah, that's, sorry, there, it says it right there. Performance standards for cannabis cultivation and
Mm-hmm.
cannabis manufacturing and processing facilities. I think that section's great. I think it's, I think it's a really good starting point. I know it's, the sort of bunch of towns mashed together. And
Good.
Could go over each zone and see what their setbacks are to, I don't have a table,
It
so.
shouldn't matter, right? Because it's going to be the same as manufacturing.
yeah, I think if we've tied it to manufacturing and
The
processing.
more we pick it over, the less the logic holds together to me. It's,
Yeah, except for, odor is something that like you had that person, complain, and if there's a specific zone where the minimum setback is just 15 feet, maybe that's something we,
well, but you have an odor clause here that's quite onerous.
right.
It
But then-
says you can't detect an odor off the property. That's the standard.
Right.
That's a pretty good standard.
You still gotta get somebody to enforce it.
Right.
I see your point.
Yeah.
We do have that.
Very
Right, where you could
poor.
just solve it right now with the distance, right? I get it, but
It's great to
Yeah.
have all
let's
the
go
stuff.
through it.
It's great to have all the stuff written down, but get somebody to enforce it when the smell comes out at, all night long and you're trying to sleep with the windows open,
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, is it worth putting I know 100 feet is 100 feet. It's not gonna
Not gonna do much.
do much.
All it does is keep the building off your
Would it be
land.
better than 15 feet, right?
Right, yeah.
So,
It is, I would think that it might, yeah, if the wind is blowing from the building in your window, 100 feet is not going to be that different than 15 or 25 feet. However, if it's blowing, 30
Sideways.
degrees off, it's probably going to make a big difference.
Tacking.
So I think it's,
100 feet wouldn't hurt. If they got enough room to put a warehouse, they can come up with 100 feet.
that's probably, yeah. Does that seem like a reasonable?
Yes.
So we take that out of the MDA and, or not take it out, but use the model that is there
So
for
it's
us
for everywhere.
in the MDA and MDB and apply it to the other.
okay.
Does that make them non-conforming grandfathered uses?
No, it's,
100 feet is still, because when they came in, I guess they followed that manufacturing, so if it stays 100 feet, then I believe they should still be in conformance. What I don't know, and it's just a question that I'm having right now, is whether it makes sense for zones that don't really allow residential or don't really,
if they don't allow residential, then
Which ones
it
don't?
would be moot, but
the industrial zones don't.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, only for the residential.
Well, but they might abut a
yeah.
residential.
True, yeah.
it's easier to just make it global and, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any zones, like the industrial zones abut zones that do allow residential, don't they?
Yeah.
So,
So I mean, the standard would be just for residential, so we don't have to worry about if it's a manufacturing next to another manufacturing, and we
Right,
don't
right.
care about the smell.
Yeah.
Just in
Okay.
no case should the building be closer than 100 feet to a
A
residential.
And I
resident.
think it's existing, I don't think it's.
An
there's
existing
no way to-
residential facility,
Yeah.
existing residential property.
There's no way to future-proof it.
If somebody,
Because,
if somebody wants to build a building next door too
that's-
close, that's their problem.
that's at their own peril. Yeah.
Coming into the nuisance. Okay. All right. I can make those changes then.
I just want to add one thing. I think we should do a little spot checking on the distances. If you're going to allow that, put that into place in all zones, I feel like we're really actually prohibiting it in some zones now, which is fine, but we might just want to check that to see how the 100-foot, because if you have like residential on either side, that could be pretty limiting on a lot that's less than an acre,
But
which
does-
is fine.
But does an acre allow a big enough warehouse
Yeah, I mean-
to actually do anything on?
Yeah, I think we just might want to look at it. If we're suddenly knocking out zones, we might just want to, we don't want to make it look like we're permitting it in zones to really prohibit it with another standard.
I'm not sure I understand. I mean, it just seems, go ahead. If it's that
For
close.
example, if you put a cannabis manufacturing or processing facility in the VC3, there's a lot of residential structures, not necessarily single family, but, you know, have units. This could include one family, two family, accessory dwelling units, mobile homes. So I don't know if there's going to be lots that you can meet that 100-foot separation in all directions.
That doesn't make me sad. You know,
Right, so my point is, if we're really not going to allow it there because we're adding this on, then we just shouldn't allow it in the zone.
But I think the counter argument that I might, going back to what Cecilia said earlier about future proofing, and like things change, you know, and if there's a point in the future where what is today a residential use becomes something else and allows this, then we don't have to think, you know, we don't have to go back and change anything to, so if we, you know, if it is within, you know, if the zone is otherwise in keeping with the areas that we want to allow this, then, you know, I don't know, that's my devil's advocate take on it.
So
I think
the,
it's fine as long as you realize this could really, we want to make sure we can legally regulate it, but you could really be prohibiting it in certain areas by adding this
I
on.
don't think if it can't fit into VC3, that's a problem. I think if it does fit into VC3 and it isn't within 100 feet of a house, then I guess it's okay because other things are allowed there. But it's not like we're making it super restrictive. There's a lot of places where you can do this now, under this rule.
so this
And I-
would be from
100 feet from a
from a
house.
building to the other building. It wouldn't be like from the property line. Is that correct, according to those standards on MDA and MDB?
It would follow those standards, which is building to building, isn't that right?
On page 6.
Where is it?
Do you think that might make a difference, Caroline?
These are side setbacks is what they are. They're not building to building setbacks.
It says from residential buildings.
Oh, it's 100 feet on your own property.
It says new buildings for the uses of blah, blah, blah,
So
including.
it's not like,
Oh, no.
it's not like a setback from the property line.
Right.
It would be a setback from where the building
Yes, a
is
site
and the
plan
residential.
approval, that's the building and the closest point of a residential, it's building to building.
Yeah, that's how I read it, is building to building.
Yeah,
So-
that reads building to building, but you're looking at putting this in every zone. Am I hearing you guys correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Houses.
I think that's a really reasonable thing to do.
Yeah, I do too. I recognize that it could be restrictive to some lots, but
Yeah, it's not, there's a lot of places we can do this, and it's, you want to put it at less than, the guy was complaining he's 125 feet away, and now we're protecting somebody from being 85 feet away.
right. Yeah. I say we try it. Other thoughts? Questions?
It's up to you.
Comments?
Should we move on to the next item and just make those two
Yeah.
changes,
Then we
which
can
is,
have a public hearing.
Does,
and-
yep. Well, we still need the legal team, Grady and Amy, still need to have to make their pass at it, or finalize their pass at it. And so the sense I got was it likely will be a December public hearing as opposed to a November public hearing.
Okay.
But, okay,
yeah, so.
mostly because of notice time.
So what'll change from here is that we're okay with outdoor storage, and that will include that provision to be 100 feet from building to building from an existing residential, just like the languages in MDA and MDB standards.
Good.
Okay.
Item number 3, initial discussion of, I don't even know how to read this, Title 30-A, MRS 4402, 6, what are those symbols? How do you say that?
Subsection.
Subsection, okay. Subsection 4402, subsection 6, and the ability of a municipality to make a finding that would allow, quote, a division of a new or existing structure into 3 or more dwelling units, end quote, to be reviewed under site plan review and be exempt from subdivision review. So, in a nutshell, talking about the possibility of lowering the bar to creating multifamily housing. Like,
Correct. So-
really high level.
Yeah, so this would, the benefit of this would be to shorten and streamline the multifamily process. So Maine has, I guess, I don't know if it's unique, but this strange way that we define in Maine's definition of subdivision. If you build a building, let's say you're going to build a multifamily apartment with just 3 apartments, and it meets every other standards of site plan, it would still be considered a subdivision, so they have to go through that concept, preliminary, and it might, some of those subdivision standards might not even apply, or it could be pretty cumbersome for the development of multifamily to have to go through that additional review standards.
So a more typical subdivision process would be, rather than 3 dwelling units, would be 3 lots? Is that
Right.
accurate? Yeah.
So, yeah, so because the way our ordinance is written and the state standard, it's that we don't use this, the way the state, sorry, and Caroline, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around the main subdivision standards, but, they consider something a subdivision, it's that division of the creation of 3 or more lots or units. And the units is the part that it could just be a building. You're not splitting up the land, but because you happen to make it a 3-family unit, then it's considered a subdivision, even though you're not splitting up the land or anything.
Well, am I correct in saying both these apartment houses that are being proposed had to go through subdivision, correct?
Yes.
Which is like the one next door, and
Right.
the one on Depot Street. I went to the meetings, and they had to meet subdivision requirements, even though they're not subdividing. It's gonna be one owner, and it'll be 30 or 67 apartments. They still had to go through subdivision, which really makes no sense.
Oh, interesting.
You know,
Can I ju-
it's not a condo where they're selling off pieces. It's one owner, one building.
And that's Maine state law.
Yeah, it's,
But yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask questions.
Yep, as it was I.
Yeah, I mean, the first one is if it was condos, then it would be a subdivision. Is that correct?
no, I don't think it
And then
matters.
the second is this is imagining a case where the building is always allowed. It's no change in land use, right?
Correct.
So it's
So it
like,
was always allowed to have an apartment building there. It's just the fact that you're putting an apartment building there requires an extra step. But it has nothing to do with changing the land use or
No,
what's
it
permitted.
won't change
so
the,
it's like,
And so it still has all the steps of a site plan approval, which could be too close or too far or not look right, and a design review if
If
we
in the
fix our
district.
design standards.
if it's in the design
If
review
it's in the design
district.
review area, right?
But like, say somebody wants to build a 3-unit
Yeah, say, or like my
Hard to even
house,
call it an apartment.
right?
Yeah, if you want to turn
V1, you know, I got a tall house in V1 and a barn. So I do a first floor unit, second floor unit, and, you know, a
It's a subdivision.
third. Yeah, and I would trigger subdivision. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Very
I
fascinating.
learned something
It is
in
kind of
prepping for this meeting.
fascinating.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense to me, again, to lay my cards on the table, to lower that bar. It just
yeah.
seems to make sense, especially in a time where there's lots of talk about, you know,
Streamlining.
Need for-
streamlining and also affordable housing.
Everybody's
and,
talking about affordable housing. This is the
Yeah.
key, is to
yeah, make
do
it
something
possible to
like
build
this.
it.
Yeah.
Can we hear a little bit more about the subdivision review for someone who's not familiar with
Yes,
that?
that would be great.
Well, they can go through the subdivision review. At the same time, they go through the site plan review. And I believe like the first time, they have to like see if they have all the buildings in the right place, if you're like identifying your open space requirement. And, you know, that's fine for an actual subdivision, but like for like the apartment buildings here, or say it was even just a 3-unit apartment and some other lot where you don't really, like, they would have to meet all these subdivision requirements. So it is more onerous, and we still have to figure out with the legal team, you know, whether we would have to make other amendments to, we would definitely have to look, you know, change a little bit or amend the site plan reviews to make sure that we are meeting all the requirements so that it could go through that. We don't know yet whether, you know, if we could regulate it differently for different types of apartments, for instance, one that would require like a road to go through it and it has like 3 different buildings, or, you know, if we can pick and choose.
Could I piggyback on Anna's question, because I don't think you got totally the answer. What hoops do you have to jump through in a subdivision review that would be eliminated by not having to jump through it? That's what we got to double check.
Right.
The having to come here for 3 meetings would be one of them?
Well, yeah, the meetings,
That's a huge
sure,
meeting.
that one we want to get rid of. The question is, what would they have to do? Is there something you're checking in a subdivision review that you wouldn't be checking if you didn't do that review?
I think there's different standards, and I think I will pass this on to Caroline, because I have not gone through the subdivision review myself. And
Yeah, I can clarify for you. So the creation of 3 or more lots or units, just to clarify, that's within a 5-year period. So Sam, if you were to put those apartments in over a number of years, you might not actually trigger subdivision.
Yep.
State law also has a whole bunch of exemptions of things that don't count as a lot or unit for triggering subdivision. So just want to point that. We have a subdivision ordinance that is designed in a way, I think, to have an end product that has those smaller lots, a new private road, and open space all around. So it's about 100 pages long. I'll brief it in 2 minutes. So the first thing someone does is they come in and they do this land analysis. And so you look at the land and you have to deduct wetlands and steep slopes and certain habitats, certain surface water bodies. You do those deductions and you figure out what areas are unbuildable and how much buildable land you have. You then take that buildable land and you have a dividing factor to figure out how many lots or units you can have. You know, most of the multifamily we've seen, especially on a bigger scale, has been in zoning districts in our growth areas closer to our downtown and is on public utilities. They also haven't been in districts that trigger open space requirements. Depending on the size of the project, whether it be lots or units, and whether or not they're connected to public or private utilities, determines if they're a major or minor subdivision. Minor subdivision has a little bit of abbreviated process. Major subdivision has a longer process. Under state law, there's 20 or so standards that every subdivision needs to meet. And then the municipalities can make up performance standards of how you demonstrate that that standard's been met. A lot of them do duplicate with site plan, like, you know, providing proof of adequate water, treating stormwater, making sure you have wastewater. I would say the biggest difference by avoiding subdivision or not going through subdivision would be that initial step of the land analysis and the determination of where you can put the units and calculating how many you can get. And then the second biggest trigger, I think, is if a road comes into play, we have a whole bunch of standards when it comes to road design and separation that a subdivision goes through, which is different. We do have the whole subdivision ordinance. Like I said, there's 20 different standards. The state allows you to do this, but you have to make a certain specific finding that you have certain standards for things. So I think conceptually, is this something that's, you know, the board's interested in potentially pursuing? If so, I think what we would do is go away, really take a hard look at the ordinance and see not only what you'd need to do for the finding, but what kind of site plan changes we might have to make. But we might actually also have to further amend the standards in the different zoning districts for the land per dwelling unit requirement. Anna, did that answer your question?
Yes, that's really helpful. Do I
Big-
need to turn these on when we're not having public hearing?
Yeah, because it's still recorded and
So I still
broadcast.
need to,
But-
no one else is
but
turning it
Carolyn,
on.
can I ask
Sure.
Oh,
follow on? But, I mean, it seems to me that those steps you just described, maybe not all 100 pages and not all 20 steps, but the key steps you just described of figuring out how much is buildable, how many lots should be allowed on that, and if you touched a road, making sure that the road met road standards, both of those seem like things we should not be pushing by the wayside. So now maybe you were saying you could incorporate those into the project review process, like move them over, skip that step, but make sure we caught those activities in the later step. If that made sense, maybe that makes sense, but you don't want to skip the land use analysis.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different a couple different ways. One of the questions we had, like Cecilia said, for the town attorney is if we go this route, you know, for something in the village, like the board just approved something on a parking lot, well, to have them go through that exercise of the net residential acreage calculation, they didn't have any wetlands, they didn't have any deer wintering areas, they didn't have steep slopes. Like some of these redevelopment sites, it really doesn't make a difference. And especially like in the VC1, there's no land per dwelling unit requirement. So they were essentially going through the steps to go through the steps. Now, if they had a pocket of wetlands and they identified it, you know, they wouldn't put the building there. So that's something that's important. So we would want to make sure that anything we're kind of bypassing that we feel is important to us as a community is incorporated into the site plan. And then like the two that just went in, they went into parking lots and didn't have a lot of sensitive features. The one next to town hall that they're proposing, there are some wetlands on that site. So that did come out. I think, you know, the biggest question I have is for something that has a road, actually subdivision roads are typically private and they are actually built to a lower or different standard than a public road to minimize pavement and impervious area and all this other thing. So I think that's definitely much something that we want to look at. And I think the question is more, do you want to look at it? You could look at it and decide that this isn't the right thing for Freeport. Or, you know, we could look at it and say, okay, we don't want to bypass subdivision entirely, but maybe, you know, looking at it as a minor subdivision to abbreviate the process would make more sense. You know, so I think you have options.
Or this makes sense totally for 5 or fewer dwelling units or 15 or fewer dwelling units or so, that kind of thing. But hey, if we're talking about 60 dwelling units, then maybe we do want to keep the higher bar in place. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, you know,
I
the other
think.
thing
Yeah, go
for
ahead.
subdivision, somebody asked the question like condos and apartments. To us and to you, we don't have those uses. We have multifamily, so it's one use. But you know, going through subdivision, they submit legal documents and association documents and all that other stuff. So those are things we'd want to look at probably and make sure we don't get lost either.
Maybe, seeing as though we got these two different developments that are going through, maybe sometime we could walk through what they've had to do.
Or hear from them how.
Yeah, just to understand for ourselves how this impacts
be
them and how it changes what we see. So that, you know, not their whole process, but what did these two apartment houses really, what did we gain by pushing these guys through subdivision? And does it need to happen on single-owned apartment houses as compared to a typical, 40-acre subdivision or a conservation subdivision where you're actually selling lots and building individual houses? How does that impact if we're trying to?
That might be a good topic for a PRB workshop too, to hear from the project review board what things are coming to them that they feel like, why are we
doing this?
Why are we spending our time doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, Sam. The initial reaction I got from the developers and some of the PRB members were like, are you kidding me? They're units? We don't do this other places. So we did get pushback, although it is the definition and the way our ordinance is, because we haven't done that finding. This is how it works in Freeport for now. I think having a workshop with the PRB on it's a really good idea. You might get some feedback as to what they feel is appropriate. And then once any projects that are in the pipeline now are done and through their appeal period, I feel like we could then bring, developers in to share their thoughts if they want to do that with you.
So it sounds like we might get to our goal faster by going to the PRB because there wouldn't be a conflict of interest. Am I understanding that right? Whereas I like Andrew's idea.
Well, I don't know if we need to bring the developers in, but I'm just saying, sort of see the process they've gone through right now.
It's been, when was our last PRB workshop? It's got to be close to a year ago.
I think we're due for a fall workshop. The timing could be good where we have a couple of important planning RFPs going out. We have this, I do think also too, although we might not want to bring people in, while there's pending applications, FEDC works with developers all the time. We could ask them to try to get some feedback on the process. I would say people are always really vocal with the negative things they don't like. We don't always hear the good things.
That's why there's nobody here tonight, right?
All good options to gather information.
Could I ask one more question? Is this only applying, or the question here is only about a single structure? Is that what you're trying to limit to? Because I think
that's a great question, Mitch. That's one of the questions that we posed to the attorney. Like, is that the two we envision that have come in recently? Well, one of them's in one structure, one of them's in two. We have a larger project on Desert Road that's in multiple structures. So one of the questions was, can we make this unique to Freeport? What doesn't count as a subdivision, or is it one size fits all, whether they do one multifamily building or five?
I think that's dramatically different.
Yeah, it's also, Caroline, do you think that might be on the exceptions? If you get your page out on that section 6, it says division of new or existing structures, a division of a new or existing structure into 3 or more dwelling units, whether the division is accomplished by the sale, lease, development, or otherwise in a municipality where the project is subject to municipal site plan review. So I don't know if the way I read this, would this just be a new or existing structure and it's not
But if it
plural?
is a single structure, then what we're talking about is building a structure that's already allowed, that land use is allowed, and that structure will go through the planning review board, but somehow, because it's a multifamily structure, they have to now do a subdivision. That seems ridiculous. But 2 buildings, it doesn't seem ridiculous at all. At least on the face of it. It's like all of a sudden you're dividing up the property and got to figure out, I'm not sure.
See, I look at it as, who's the owner? How many different owners are there? This guy next door, it's 2 buildings, 1 owner. If he goes to sell it and split the lot, he might have to come in for a review.
Right, then it's
My concern is 1 owner, who's the owner, how many units are there, and what's he really doing there?
And is the land use, the wetland, all that?
He's already had to do that.
He's already had to do it, then I don't know what it is about, right.
That's sort of where I draw the line is, I'd like to look, I don't have a set opinion, but I'd like to look at it and say, okay, we got, 1 landowner, he's going to own both those buildings, he's going to rent apartments. If he wants to sell condos at some point, that's a whole different review he's got to go through for a change of use or whatever, but I think if 1 owner owns them all and he rents them, maybe it's 60, or maybe there's a break point more than 5 or something, but
that's what
I just can't see this subdivision thing for a single owner.
I sort of gravitate toward figuring, it's hard to draw a line, but you know, you go, it's like with cannabis, there's tiers, you know, you end up, it's like, all right, there's, you know, one building and it's got 30 units, there's 2 buildings and each one has 15, there's 4 buildings and each one has 7.5. But you know what I mean, like
At some point, there's a scale there where you need
yeah,
to
where you
step in.
kind of, you sort of figure out like, okay, if it's 3 buildings and not more than 20 units or there's you know, there's ways to massage it. And I think I think it's definitely worth looking at, I guess is the bottom line for me.
I just think there ought to be
think
some
it's-
kind of a review there besides making them go through a quote-unquote subdivision if they're building.
Yeah.
Now, maybe we need to have, you know, come around the backside somehow and say, okay, we still have to have these protections, but they don't have to go through subdivision per se.
Right, and they'll have to do site plan for
Yeah,
just
they
about
still
any
have
of the.
That's
yeah.
right, they have to do all that stuff.
yeah.
They still have to do their wet calculations and their parking calculations. and-
This seems like it's going to be a staff-heavy project, I guess is my only concern here. And I think it's definitely worth doing, but I also want to just recognize that there's a lot of other things that also need doing. So, given that staff resources are relatively finite, maybe we can hire some things out, but budgets are budgets. I guess that, and that's not so much for, I guess we would, or I, speaking for myself, I would lean on you guys to sort of tell us what you think you can take on. Because I would hate to prioritize this at the expense of other things that we've been talking about for years. On the other hand, this does seem like a really, it's very much in keeping with the kinds of things that we've been talking about on the planning board, you know,
Maybe we could have
in the
them-
downtown visioning plan, so.
Maybe we could get together with the PRB and just mock up what they'd have to do. Some applicant, we'll make a dummy applicant, you know, a fake applicant, make him mock up a
I would love
project.
to do that. I think we
And
would
then
all.
educate all of us to,
Yeah.
okay, what's this guy going through, what's this woman going through?
I can give you a mock-up for projects that are under construction and have been through the approval process. I think at this point, it sounds like there's enough interest for us to put some basic time to get some legal clarification as to what you would have, if you'd have the ability to make any distinction between different types of multifamily scenarios and then put something together. I think it could be a project. We finally got very little bit of guidance on the new rules that the state adopted, LD 2003 for affordable housing. Those are supposed to be implemented by municipalities by July of 2023. So I think, you know, these might be 2 projects that we could do at the same time. It's not something we're going to work on today. You know, Cecilia's becoming a cannabis regulation expert for Freeport. I think wrapping up that project is really important. We have some design standards, we have some comp plans, we have oodles of ordinance cleanup, but I think it's something we can get started on. And as we shift some staff duties internally, if we bring on a sustainability coordinator, we will have a little bit more time to be put into different projects. So I think if you're interested but don't feel like we need to drop everything and work on it today, that gives us some good guidance to poke around and determine if, what, when we need to bring something back to you for a little more input.
Yeah, let's get cannabis done so that we can. use
Carolyn,
those
does that,
resources
Carolyn,
elsewhere.
does that new state law that they've passed on affordable housing, does that include the accessory dwelling act they were promoting?
Yeah, it does include the accessory dwelling units. I think overall, I would say we are in pretty good shape. I think we're probably gonna have to make some adjustments, but we do already allow them at least.
Is there
But yeah,
a,
we're gonna have to look at that.
is there a distance requirement in the states? I know Freeport has a distance requirement from the initial dwelling, which I've always opposed.
I can't remember because honestly, the state language went through so many versions and
Yeah.
so many changes. We just got some final guidance. We have a handout actually that we just got from the state that I wanted to send to all of you, just kind of like an FYI, so you can read about it on your own. So you'll know about it a little bit when we talk about it and bring the information forward. So we'll send that to you. We just got it last week. So you guys can all do a little bit of reading.
If I remember right, Freeport's accessory dwelling has to be 50 feet from the initial dwelling, which really
Yeah,
seems,
we had a requirement, Andy, and then I can't remember if we removed it or changed it. I knew we did something at some
It's
point in
something,
time.
Yeah,
I think
thought it was more than that.
well, it used to be 50 feet, because I measured from my house to my garage, and it was,
Floor.
48 feet.
well, but, yeah, no, mine was like 65 feet, and I couldn't use the top of my garage for an accessory dwelling, which absolutely made no sense at all. And it might have been changed, but last time I looked at it, it was You know, if you have 3 acres, why
Well,
does it
it's
have
gonna
to be
drive
on
me
top of the
crazy,
house?
so let me look it up. Let's see here. Accessory apartments.
I don't know if there's a provision in there for if it already is existing or if it's a new one. Like if it's already existing, it's okay if it's further than 50 feet, and if it's new, then it has to be. But
Basically, the goal is to try to keep people from skirting the requirements on running like a 2-unit in a zone that doesn't allow.
Oh, yeah,
2
yeah, but I'm
units.
just saying, you know, if,
Yeah.
you know, if you want to build an
Yeah.
accessory,
Andy, they did tweak it in 2012. So buildings in existence prior to February 7th, 2012 that are greater than 50 feet from the single family dwelling may be used for an accessory apartment provided no additions are added to the existing structure.
yeah, but if somebody has 2 or 3 acres, what real difference does it make whether it's 50 feet or, I mean, as long as they're using the same driveway or, you know, I mean, I just never understood why, you know,
Don't we basically have two-family zoning? Isn't that what we already have?
well, the ADUs, they circumvent that in a way, and it's really supposed to be accessory to the principal
yeah.
home. And it's really a way to help out people to like age in place. So the AARP is a huge promoter of it. And for people in terms of affordability, and even like, it's a way that,
We get it, but why does it have to be so close to the house?
I think
Why
the
can't it be
idea
on
is
the other end of the
If I have a 2-unit on my property and you live next door, even if we both have 3 acres, I can't then build an ADU like right on the property line over by you and sort of like then rent it out in a way that is sort of on the edge of making it a 3-unit property in a zone that doesn't allow that.
I mean,
and
you
then-
have to be, you have to live in the existing home to make the other unit work.
Right. I'm
You can't
not
do it.
advocating for or against. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to say, like, what I think the intent is to protect against that with the goal of protecting sort of like the rural character so that you don't have neighbors just sort of like, oh, you know how I can make a few extra bucks is by building a rental unit, but I don't want to deal with it myself, so I'm going to put it way over on the corner of the property so I don't have to
As
look
long
at
as you're
it.
within the setbacks, what difference
Yeah,
does it make?
as long as you're
Fair
within the
enough. Yeah. Once again, I'm just,
That's what I'm thinking.
yeah, so it's interesting because, you know, I think it's awesome that Freeport has the ADU ordinance, frankly. Like Portland did not allow it in most neighborhoods up until like 2 or 3 years ago, so we're way far ahead of that. It is, in terms of housing affordability, it is kind of critical piece to make that possible. And I think when they passed the ADU, I mean, ADUs are supposed to be sort of what some people would call it the gateway drug to higher density, right? So I think when they passed it, they were more careful and tried to create more restrictions. And one of them is that you have to, you know, live in the unit, which is also another, maybe an AARP considers that an impediment in terms of like people might not want to invest if they think, you know, then I can't move. What if I get a job? So what if I have to leave for a couple of years and I can't rent it, you know? So, I mean, it's something that would be interesting to review that as the town looks more into affordability, and that is like one piece of the puzzle of, yeah.
Seems like that's where the energy is, that we definitely want to look into it, but
At some point, I'd like to see where it goes, that's all.
great. Anything else on item 3? Or 3A, as I guess we got into there with a little bit of a,
Sidebar.
Sorry, did I have a
LD
typo
What is it,
on that?
2002, is that what? Or 2003? 20, whatever, it doesn't matter.
2003.
Anyway, item number 4. So
Yeah,
like
sorry.
kind of 3.
That's my
Yeah,
typo
no, it's
there.
okay. I think it's cool. Item number 4, general discussion of ordinance changes recommended by the planning board during the past year, to see if there are any topics that we want to get feedback on and or revisit. We have mentioned over the last year or so doing this sort of thing, where we say, make a recommendation, see what the council has to say, you know, hopefully they adopt it. We revisit the changes that we've made and see how they're working in the real world. Is that
Yeah.
the goal here? I'm assuming,
Right, right.
Somebody
We're
has a
just
list
looking
of
for
these.
feedback to see if you guys want,
and it's not me, I don't have a list of these
want
things.
us to get like a,
Zero
gather
list.
some data. Sorry, I don't have a list for you, but there are only, you did a lot of ordinance amendments last year and throughout the year, so there was a long list of amendments, but the ones that were impactful, that weren't just like minor tweaks or revisions or clarifications would be one, the solar energy generation system, so the solar farms. The other one were some changes or zoning amendments to the village commercial districts. So one of them was we added mixed-use development as permitted in the village, but that was sort of like a clarification so that you could have residential and commercial in the same building, which was always the intent, but it wasn't written well on that. But Village Commercial District also had some other amendments, which was changing the minimum building height, that we went from, I think it was 35 to now it's allowed up to 3 stories with a maximum of 45 feet on the VC1, VC2, and VC3. And the other change to the Village Commercial Districts was changing the minimum dwelling unit per acre to 0 on VC1. So I don't know if you want us to collect data to see if that needs to be tweaked or moving on. Then we have.
Can you go over that one more time? Minimum dwelling unit to 0, so it basically means as much as you can fit on the lot.
Within the other standards,
Within the
yeah.
envelope
Yeah.
of 3 stories.
Just on VC3, and
Just
that's
on
kind of
VC3.
how we get these 2 new apartments.
Right.
Yes,
Is that
okay.
now it?
I understand.
And that would probably be the most data collection we could get for you, but I'm not sure. I'd have to verify.
I'd definitely be interested in hearing about the solar, just if have there been any proposals?
There was one proposal on commercial 1, but they didn't come back. I think it's still pending. Is that correct, Caroline?
Yeah, we had a couple inquiries. We had one person that didn't go forward at all once the state rule changed. The one on Route 1 South, I would say, is kind of in pending status. We got through site walk and conceptual plans, but from a staff perspective and PRB perspective about trying the ordinance itself and, finding how it works, we didn't really get far enough in the process to get good feedback out of it.
Fair enough.
There are 3 other zoning amendments you made was the food trucks. So those were the amendments related to having them on. And then the temporary activity amendments, which I guess those affected just VC1 and VC2, and the seasonal outdoor seating amendments, which affected quite a few downtown districts. And I can email you guys a list if you want.
Have there been any issues that you got, from any of these, like complaints about seasonal seating or anything from either side of the?
I am lucky
aisle,
to not
so to
really be on the complaints department end of the phone line, so I would refer to Caroline. Do you know if we got any complaints?
I am on the receiving end of constructive feedback is what I like to call it. I think we've been pretty lenient with the outdoor seating. Like if someone gives me a site plan or a sketch and just kind of jots out what they're doing, I've pretty much signed off on it. I've had a couple people, ask me for igloos or to put up something bright and colorful. And I'm like, if you could kind of steer away from that, that would probably be best. That wasn't really like the intent. Overall, I think it's worked well. One issue I think we've had, which would be more of public education, is come in and ask permission so we know you're putting it there, because we do want to make sure you're not displacing ADA parking or the accessible travel paths. I think there's been a learning curve and it's been a challenge. As we put these outdoor seating in, we're making sure to not displace ADA parking. We want to make sure that we're not interfering with the accessible routes. However, we do need to make sure that furniture is accessible and umbrellas are at a certain height. So I think it's been a little eye-opening to some public education opportunities that are beyond the purview of the planning board, but are still kind of interesting points that have come up out of it. We've had a couple businesses come in and take advantage of it. We did have the 2 parklets go up this year, which we followed kind of the same timeline. And we did have a business owner come in and ask for permission for the council to do it in the public right of way because they didn't have space, but kind of along the same guidelines with timing and square footage.
I'm curious
So
what,
other than that, being aware of making sure businesses are aware of ADA, I haven't really gotten much complaints on it.
Probably good. You had a question, Hannah?
yeah, I was just curious about Desert of Maine. I can't remember, was that this past year or 2 years ago that we
It
were?
was 2
2 years
plus
ago.
years ago. I think it was a
Oh,
while
wow,
ago.
it's all vague. Has there been much community feedback from neighborhoods around there about how that's impacted the community?
Yeah, you mean like on the zoning changes when they came in for the applicant-driven
Yes,
agenda
exactly.
item? I would say we haven't gotten a ton of feedback. I did get a couple public comments that people were surprised when they put like mini golf in, but that was something that was worked into the definition and was, disclosed during that process that could be something to support. They really only have one direct abutter. I think she's, as any direct abutter, when there's construction and heavy equipment and new use of a property, you do notice it. But really, they only have one person that's right there. So we've gotten some feedback. I haven't gotten a ton of feedback at this point. That being said, they're still kind of finalizing what they want to do. They just came to them in their cabins. They're still working on restoring the Tuttle Barn, so they're not using that for events as they predicted. So I don't think, we haven't really seen the full build out yet, I think, of what they want to do there, Anna, to see if we're going to get other feedback on impacts to that area.
Gotcha, thanks.
Sorry, that was over a year ago, so it didn't make it to my list.
Oh, no, that's fine. It's fun to
Yeah, it
have
might
it.
actually predate you, Cecilia. Get a waiver on that
I
one.
think I had just started when it was finally being passed, so.
Yeah,
Yep.
all
Time.
comes
Yeah,
together.
time.
Yeah.
Time flies, or it doesn't. During the pandemic,
Yeah.
it's like other questions, or does anyone want more specific information about any of those? Yeah.
I have no questions looking backward. I have questions looking forward. So I had 2 things I wanted to just bring up. One is the design guidelines and where that's at, because I think we should be trying to move as quickly as possible on that. So that's, you could answer that and then I'll bring up the other one.
Okay, so we have 3 RFPs that our department needs to do. RFP number 1 was funding for digitization of all of our paper records. That has gone out. Next in line, currently being typed up, is the RFP for the comp plan, which really got delayed for various reasons and then further bumped back by the visioning. But that RFP, because that's going to be, I would say, something we're behind where we ideally would want to be with our current comp plan, losing its consistency finding in about a year. And that process will probably take, at minimum, if we fast track it, 18 to 24 months. Right behind that will be updating the design standards. The design standards or design review, updating that is funded through the operating budget. So that project will need to be completed and delivered to the town of Freeport by June 30.
Oh, good. So there's pressure on it.
There's pressure on.
Okay, good. So that, I think it will help, because I think it'll help. And then the other one was about parking. And so I wondered whether there's any ongoing monitoring of parking. I feel like we're gonna keep facing parking issues. And when we talked about it last time, when we were talking about the lowering the standards in BC1 for,
Yep,
and
for
we all
residential.
want to do that. I think we all want to limit parking that we don't need, but I'm wondering, do we have an ongoing monitoring? And I was reminded at the festival when it was very hard to find a place to park.
Yeah, it was.
And I don't know whether I didn't go in the garage, because who likes to go in the garage? But if you tell me the garage was half empty, then my sympathy goes away, but I don't know, maybe it was full.
I need to check out the
I
garage.
actually got some feedback on that today, Mitch, because I asked the same question. So we monitor parking. I would say Cecilia does most of our parking lot counts. Right now, during the week, our parking lots are never full. We actually didn't see them full all summer. And I believe Cecilia knows the data better at this point because she's out there in the field. But I think even the last time we counted on Black Friday, it wasn't entirely full. So we are continuing to monitor, but honestly, we're not probably going to continue with daily counts once it gets cold, just because we're not going to have them. We take a lull in the winter and then we revamp. It's hard for us to get weekend counts. We just don't have the staff capacity. If we're up here, I confessed today, if I ever drive through Freeport, I take a spin to see what the parking lot situation is. I asked a couple people about the garage because I heard the traffic was crazy this weekend. I then later found out not only was it Fall Festival, but there was some sporting events and something else going on. So there was a lot of stuff going on at one time. Somebody that was involved with the event on the north side of Main Street said he felt that, we're lazy. People don't like to walk. He felt that there wasn't parking right in front of some of the buildings on the north end, but in the outer areas there was. I talked to 3 people that had been in the garage. One was Saturday morning and they said there was plenty of parking. In the afternoon, I was told like around 3, it was pretty full, but people could still go in and get parking. I haven't heard reports if every single space in there was used or not. Again, these are unofficial, these are observations, but I will say, Mitch, I haven't stopped talking about parking for 20 years, so I don't think we're going to stop now.
Never will.
Planning board just keeps rolling
Well, just
with
the more we
conversations.
take away parking lots and turn them into, we got to make sure we don't mess up.
Yes, I think, we're going to lose that one parking lot with this, if they build the 67 units. However, I just in general, my understanding in planning theory is that you never want to look at major events to go count parking and measure whether you have enough or not. Because if we did that, you end up with these vast amounts of parking lots. So that's exactly what you don't want to see that as an indicator of your parking needs, because the day after Thanksgiving or a festival, those don't happen every day. So that's not what we're planning for parking to fulfill our needs. And if we want to build up a stadium and have events every day, then you want to have that kind of parking for those types of events. But otherwise, that's not, we can't have walkability if we have excessive parking. But
Right. Yeah, it's always going to be a balance, and I think that's the, hearing that. I actually had a couple of friends text on Saturday saying, "Wow, I've never seen Freeport like this. Like, this is crazy. This is the busiest I've ever seen it," which is great. And I think we're so far from getting a reputation as a place that doesn't have any parking. And you think about Portland and
look at Portland. Portland doesn't have parking,
Yeah,
right?
it doesn't.
Right.
And their parking is more expensive than in Boston. However, has that decreased the desirability of the town? Has that made people not want to live downtown? Has that made people not want to develop the town or build or move there? I mean, the city continues to become.
Was it here that somebody said? I think it was at the planning board that apparently that the new building that's going up in the center, it's like two city
zero.
center, has no parking.
Yeah, that
which
was
seems
very fascinating.
crazy.
Yeah.
But
But there's parking on the street in Portland.
right,
In a lot of places.
Yeah. So I think it's a. I see it. I mean, if the parking garage isn't even full on the fall festival weekend, I think it's a great point that we are absolutely going to have to monitor it. But I think so far,
Yeah.
2 points on that. Parking garage is poorly signed off Main Street.
Yeah.
And it doesn't say free.
Right.
Most parking places, most parking garages in Maine or cities charge.
Right, and as soon as you've turned in,
Yeah.
it's too late. You're
It's too
paying
late. So-
20
so
bucks.
if there-
Yeah,
so
so
if there
people
was
don't
some-
want to take that risk.
There was
yeah.
some kind of a sign on Main Street, and I know everybody hates signs, but, you know, signage helps.
Free parking.
Free parking,
Right.
and, you know, and have it go in there. And the other thing is, I, like Cecilia, I've always believed that when you drive down Exchange Street, it's hard to find a parking spot, it's narrow, it's always busy, and doesn't make you not go there. You just circle a couple times till you find a spot. So if Freeport sort of looks busier because we have less parking, at some point, I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it looks busy. There's nothing worse than driving out to the mall or any place and seeing a sea of empty parking space, say, why do I want to go here? Nobody else is here either.
Or driving
Always
through,
want to go where it's busy because it's more fun.
driving through like Gillette Stadium, you know, on a non-game day. It's like,
What's going to happen to the farmer's market?
I don't know. I don't.
Is there any idea?
In the winter you're talking about? Rosie?
Yeah, so
Yeah, well,
two,
no, they're gonna build.
Oh, that's where they're
That's
building.
where they're
Well,
building.
no, that's the one that only received conceptual.
Yes, it's
Still
not
not
there,
there.
it's coming.
In the process, though.
It used to be right out here on Fridays.
Yeah, can we put it right on
The
the?
town
It
hall
used to
is
be right in the
closed
town
on-
hall parking lot on Fridays.
So, oh, okay, so,
Used to be there, then Beans moved it over to their place on,
yeah,
you know, what used to be Moore Street. It was over there, nobody saw it.
nobody saw, yeah. definitely.
So,
and the Grange has a farmer's market that they've been hosting too.
Right.
So they would have to find a new home if potentially if that lot.
you know, those
turns
glossy
into-
renderings of downtown with the big courtyard in
Right.
front of Bean. Just put it right there, you know, just shut down the street and have it in the pedestrian mall. I think it'd be great.
The marketplace that they were talking
Yeah,
about.
exactly. Right. Yeah. All right. Anything else? Questions? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
motion to adjourn.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent.
Thank
All right.
you all.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks, everyone.
Carolyn, thanks, Cecilia.
Thank you, guys.
thank you. So.
Well, it's not even 8 o'clock.
No public.
Me.